Hey everybody! This week I want to talk about fake baits. If you saw my video last week, I talked about fresh baits like oama, halaloo, sardines, eel, taco, aku belly, anything that's either alive or comes from an animal. And this week, let's talk about the opposite, fake baits. Whether that's lures, grubs, poppers, flies, anything that's not alive or doesn't come from an animal, basically. So to start off, let's be general. What colors are good for any of these fake baits? And my honest answer is, I think any color will catch a fish. The first thing that the lure, popper, grub, anything needs to catch is you. If we, the fishermen, the fisher people, don't buy it, it doesn't matter what color it is. It's not gonna catch any fish because no one's gonna use it. So honestly, my favorite color is purple. I have purple lures, purple grubs, purple flies, and really it's just something that appealed to me. So I know a lot of people have their preference in terms of black or green or like the firecracker color, and I think all of them work. An interesting story that I read from Uncle Mark White, was something called The Love Story of the Color Brown. And when I thought about it, I went, why is the color brown so good? And you know, this information that he got was from somebody that I definitely respect and trust. It was from the owners of the Lihue fishing supply store, the Kanemaru family, and they're definitely very knowledgeable. But when I thought about it, I said, why brown? What makes brown a color, you know, worth looking into? And when I really thought about it, I think it's because it's a dark shade of color. So when you're bringing that lure, grub, fly, popper, anything through the water, and let's say there's a lot of whitewash, a lot of wave action, I think it stands out and it's visible to the fish. I think that a dark color as a whole is a really good starting point, especially if you're fishing in somewhere in an area that has a lot of surge and white water. Personally, when I'm trying to fish for moi, I do like a darker colored grub, even if it's, let's say, early in the morning or late evening. I have had success with those darker colors. And I think another thing to look at is more the action of the lure, grub, popper, fly, anything you're using, because when that piece of bait or that piece of, I guess, fake bait in this case, is moving through the water, the swim action that it has, as well as the action you're giving it based on how you retrieve the lure, makes a difference in how it's presented to the fish and what the predatory fish are seeing. So for example, if a barracuda is chasing my lure and I go ahead and stop it altogether, I think the barracuda is gonna look at it and say, oh, it's not worth chasing this because look, it just died, it stopped. And they're not gonna have the reaction to chase it and, you know, attack that lure. And I think the same thing goes with when you're, let's say, using a fly and you toss out a fly with the bubble float, the one that you'll put water inside, and you're popping it on the surface of the ocean or the wherever you're casting it, and that popping sound, that popping motion with the bubble float, it makes a certain sound, and I think that sound attracts the fish because they're thinking something's feeding. They're thinking something is, you know, moving differently, it's wounded, let's say. Next, let's talk about the placement of the lure, the grub, the fake bait. And what I mean by placement is how far we're casting it and the area the fake bait needs to be in order for the fish to see it. So if we're trying to cast towards, let's say, a school of sardines, we know how far that school is, and we need to be able to present our bait to the fish that are feeding on it. So if we're not able to get that bait out there to where the fish are feeding, it's not going to do very well in terms of catching fish. Another thing to think about is what is the size of the fish the bigger predatory fish are feeding on. So what I mean by this is if all of the predatory fish are feeding on, let's say, oama, you want to have a lure or fake bait that's approximately the same size as the oama. Or if, let's say, we're looking at freshwater, what is the size of the bait fish the tucanary or the bass are feeding on? And the size of the prey matters, because if the predatory fish are not able to fit your fake bait in their mouth, they're going to be intimidated and scared away by it. So if I'm fishing, let's say, a halaloo school, and I'm using some plastic grubs, here, let me show you. So Sato Lures got me this really cool tackle box, and they filled it with a bunch of goodies. So when I'm fishing, let's say, the halaloo schools, I would use something like this, and the color varies. You can use any color. Like I said, I like purple, but this to me would be actually a little large for halaloo. And the reason is the halaloo that I'm trying to catch might be, 4, maybe 6 inches at best. So if you think about how big their mouth is, their mouth isn't necessarily going to be able to swallow this bait that's approximately, 2 1/4 inches. They're going to only look at that and be like, okay, maybe I can eat it, but you're going to have less success in hooking it up. And I would say the same goes for almost any fish. Yes, they might be able to take a bigger lure, but the fake bait isn't matching the naturally occurring bait. And I think that's something that we need to pay attention to, because a lot of people just get this default mentality of big bait equals big fish. And while that is very true, I feel like you can go on a very long dry spell with that mentality, and nobody likes to just not catch anything. Personally, I would rather catch a bunch of things, even if they're not world record size or 100-pound ulua. It's something that keeps you motivated to keep on going back because, hey, you had some success. And I think when we talk about lures and weight, I personally love these Mark White lures because they're ceramic and heavy. So a lure of this size is 1/2 ounce. That is a pretty great weight for something so small. I'm able to cast it, 40, 50 yards, and that gives me a greater range when it comes to trying to hit certain areas. So if you're fishing for, let's say, papio, and you're fishing a reefy area, it gives you the opportunity to spread out and cast and different angles to cover more ground, as opposed to if you're only able to cast 10 yards and you're covering a much smaller area. You need to have a lure that is balanced for the pole and reel that you're using. So if I'm using a really big, heavy reel, let's say like a Stratic 10,000, you're not going to be able to use this 1/2 ounce lure. It's just not going to have the weight to bring the line out and get your fake bait to the area you're trying to fish. You definitely would need to use something bigger, maybe 1.5 ounces or 2 ounces. I hope you all learned a little something about fake baits. I hope that you go ahead and check out Mark White's post about the love story of the color brown. It was definitely an interesting read, and it really talks about how he started his wood lure business. And let me tell you, some of his wood lures are absolutely beautiful and you don't want to use them. Here is one of his wood lures. This is a bamboo lure, so it's on the lighter side, but it definitely has a great action in the water. Because of its shape, it has a popping motion while it's swimming. Definitely great action. And also, when I think of these great lure makers, Jordan Iso Automatic Flies has some awesome flies. Sato Lures makes some awesome grubs. So does the Campania Lures. There's a whole bunch of local lure makers, and I think it's really important for us in Hawaii to support our local lure makers, because we have a very unique community of fishermen. I think that our type of fishing is different than anywhere else in the world, and I really want us to support each other, because I don't think there's any other fishing community in the world that is as close-knit and supportive as we are here in Hawaii. So I really want to encourage everybody to keep that up. Thank you for watching this week's episode, and next week I'm going to be talking about the different equipment and gear that I use, both for casting conventional as well as for my smaller spinner setup. So stay tuned for that.